Brazilian model Amanda Ungaro made a UN ambassador to Grenada.
Like it.
Happy
But
birthday,
in the
Paulo, I
case
love you.
of these fake
Amanda Ungaro
diplomats,
is also
I
Paulo
think for its
Zampoli's
own
wife.
reputation, I'm a former UN
Paulo
appeal
Zampoli
judge,
told us he and his
I
wife
find
were
it
assets.
outrageous
He brought
that
investment to the
UN
islands.
accepts
Grenada
these
told us his wife
It
Amanda
hates
Ungaro is no
challenging
longer a
the
UN
actions
ambassador.
of member states. Member states don't like it.
Our
But
undercover
in the
investigation
case
into
of
buying an
these
ambassadorship
fake
in Dominica
diplomats,
takes an
I think for
unexpected
its
and
own
dramatic turn.
reputation, it must.
Paulo Zampoli told us he and his wife were assets. Oliver Serafin, Dominica's ex-prime minister, says the outcome of the forthcoming election his wife Amanda Ungaro is no longer a UN ambassador. He says if we offer the opposition party a donation, they'd appoint our investigation into buying an ambassadorship in Dominica. He tells us to call the opposition dramatic turn. Paulo Zampoli told us he and his wife were assets. Oliver Serafin, Dominica's ex-prime minister, told us his wife Amanda Ungaro is too close to call a UN ambassador. He says if we offer the opposition party a donation, our undercover candidate and ambassador in Dominica. He tells us to call the opposition party's lawyer. Paulo Zampoli told us he and his wife were assets. Oliver Serafin, ex-prime minister, told us.
Okay, can you say you're speaking on his behalf, David?
Yes, I can say that.
Lennox Linton, the opposition leader, could become the next prime minister within weeks.
The opposition now really requires funding. Make no mistake, we are moving along, but as in all things, financial contributions are required.
Bruni stressed our candidate for ambassador would have to be of good character and help develop Dominica's economy.
I just wanted to be clear that you were aware of the conversations that OJ had been having with my representative in Panama?
Oh, yes. OJ is a trusted confidant, definitely. I'm very comfortable with him, and the leader of the party is very comfortable with me.
He's trusted. So what OJ had to say, you're 100% happy with all of that. That's
100%.
I just wanted to be clear that you were aware of the conversations that OJ
Bruni
had
then
been
drafted a
having with my
document
representative
stating
in
that
Panama?
within 28 days of Lennox Linton becoming prime minister, he'd appoint our man ambassador at large. There's no mention of campaign donations.
I would suggest that the Panama dollar matter. They prefer not to discuss it on the phone. They believe that there are lots of hackers and so on.
Serafin means the payment agreed in Panama to buy a diplomatic passport.
Okay, but how to figure out, we're talking in the region of about 400,000.
Both Bruni and Serafin appear keen to avoid the direct involvement of the opposition leader, who's campaigning on a platform of anti-corruption.
The gentleman prefers to create a buffer because he does not want to be implicated at that stage.
The vital interests of the people come first at all times.
The request would be that the first 50% of the Panama Agreement will be what is expected at this time. The funds are needed very urgently. T-shirts and vehicle space systems and various supplies.
Serafin sends bank account details for his $50,000 fee and $20,000 for lawyer David Bruni, who he says will also handle money for the opposition.
Amongst that could be assisting the leader can come through his account. The funds will be declared as humanitarian donations to Dominica.
We've obtained a second document signed by both opposition leader Linton and his lawyer. That also promises an ambassadorship to another foreign national if the opposition win the election. Early November 2019, and Prime Minister Skerritt finally announces the date.
Elections in the Commonwealth of Dominica is Friday, the 6th of December 2019.
Roosevelt Skerritt strongly denies speaking to Oliver Serafin about an ambassadorship, calling his comments totally false. Skerritt says he's suing Lennox Linton for making similar statements. Serafin says he was speaking without authority, name-dropping to impress. Lennox Linton said he knew nothing about Serafin's conversations with Bruni and would never exchange an ambassadorship or passport for money. David Bruni didn't reply to our queries. The end of Carnival in Dominica is marked by a symbolic funeral. This year's winning Calypso is all about corruption paying for power. As our investigation shows, that's not limited to any one party or one nation.
The money controllers in the country, fire upon them, fire upon them.
Any regime putting up diplomatic status for sale is morally bankrupt.
Architects of the people's poverty, fire upon them, fire upon them. Businessmen.
It's a whole business to give immunity and protection to crooks and criminals.
It's a business where countries keep their list of diplomats from their own people.
The ambassador is supposed to be representing the country. Is that supposed to be secret? Secret Asian ambassador. It's like, you gotta be kidding me.
So no secret society, no political party go by me to sell out my country. I'd rather be broke and free than have plenty money than sing with dictionary.
Secret Asian ambassador. It's like, you gotta be kidding me.
August on Al Jazeera.
Kenya braces for a tightly contested vote as the country goes to the polls in elections that will shape its future.
The Listening Post examines and dissects the world's media, how they operate and the stories they cover.
5 years on since Myanmar's Muslim minority were forced from the country, we look at the plight of the Rohingya.
Al Jazeera World showcases the best documentaries from across the network, including a new 3-part series, The 60s in the Arab World.
As protests continue following the swearing-in of the new president, could Sri Lanka's economic and political crisis lead to a humanitarian one?
August on Al Jazeera.
They're the young virtuosos gracing concert halls and dominating international competitions. 101 East meets South Korea's musical prodigies. On Al Jazeera.
Following the swearing-in of the new president, could Sri Lanka's economic and political crisis lead to a humanitarian?
Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani International Anti-Corruption Excellence Award. Vote now for your hero.
This is Al Jazeera.
Hello, I'm Mariam Namazi. A very warm welcome to the News Hour, live from London. Coming up in the next 60 minutes. We look at the standoff at Iraq's parliament. Supporters of Muqtada al-Sadr remain camped inside the building as rival demonstrators gathered nearby. Thousands of tons of corn leave Ukraine's port of Odessa, the first cargo vessel to set sail under a UN-brokered deal with Russia. There's speculation U.S. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's tour of Asia will include a stopover in Taiwan. China warns her visit will have consequences. And our exclusive report from Nigeria as armed forces crack down on illegal oil refineries to save billions of dollars in lost revenue.
In sport, Cleveland Browns quarterback Deshaun Watson is suspended for sexual misconduct. And shocking scenes in Argentina as a female referee is punched by a player.
Hello and welcome to the News Hour. So we've continued to follow events in Baghdad, where several months of political instability and indecision have culminated in a standoff in and around the country's parliament. Thousands of protesters are still camped inside. They are supporters of politician Muqtada al-Sadr and are refusing to leave until there is political change. And on Monday, protesters opposed to Sadr moved in to state their own position. They are members of a group called the Coordination Framework. They set up camp near the 14th of July bridge, staging a counter-protest to the one happening inside the parliament grounds. The two demonstrations are part of a wider political struggle unfolding in Iraq. Sadr won the most support in elections last year, but has been unable to form a government that excludes his opponents. The rival alliance wants Mohammed al-Sudani to be the next prime minister, while the group includes Iran-aligned politicians and Iran-trained paramilitary groups. Not all the members are backed by Tehran. Iraq has now gone more than 9 months without a new government, adding to the country's dysfunction. Despite huge oil wealth, ordinary Iraqis are suffering from regular power and water cuts, with 2.4 million people in need of food and livelihood assistance. Mahmoud Abdul Wahid begins our coverage now with this report from the counter-protest near the 14th of July bridge in Baghdad.
Two different scenes in the Iraqi capital, Baghdad. Two rival protests. Now, here in this area, these are the supporters of the pro-Iran parliamentary bloc called the Coordination Framework. They've come here in the thousands near the green zone. They've clashed with the security forces and pulled down some of the concrete blocks at the fence of the green zone. They say that they've come here to preserve the state institutions and to protect the legitimacy of the state. They say they are rejecting the occupation of the parliament headquarters by supporters of the Shia cleric Muqtada al-Sadr. Now they have been chanting against Mustafa al-Kadhimi, accusing him, as they say, of collaborating with the supporters of al-Sadr in order to stay in power. They have been chanting against the United States. They have been chanting against Israel, linking both of them, ironically, to al-Sadr supporters.
Well, Al Jazeera's Dorsa Jabari is also in Baghdad and has been speaking to Sadr supporters who have now spilled out onto the Iraqi parliament grounds.
These demonstrators have now been here in the Iraqi parliament over 48 hours, and they say they will stay here as long as it's needed. They say they will wait until they get further instructions from their leader, Muqtada al-Sadr. We are just outside the building itself in the courtyard area, and as you can see, it is full of people. Inside, it was very difficult to even breathe due to the crowds that have gathered, and now they have taken over the entire grounds of the parliament area. Muqtada al-Sadr issued a statement on Sunday evening urging all Iraqis to come to the capital and support these demonstrators, but since then, his media relations office has said that they don't want anybody to come from the other provinces until further notice. We also understand that the counter-protests that have been ongoing outside the walls of the Green Zone, which is about 3 kilometers from here, there have been a number of demonstrators having minor skirmishes with the security forces who have had to use water cannons to disperse the crowds. They are not going to be allowed to climb over the concrete walls to get to this area. The fear is that the two sides will be, there will be clashes between the two sides of the demonstrators. The Sadrists here say that they want a complete overhaul of the system. They accuse the politicians of being corrupt and that they are tired of having Iraq in the hands of what they call external influences, including Iran and the United States.
Zaid Al-Ali is a former legal advisor to the United Nations focusing on constitutional, parliamentary and judicial reform in Iraq. He joins us now from Istanbul. What did you make of the demonstration by Sadr's opponents today, the kind of numbers involved, and could their presence become stronger if Sadr does not withdraw his loyalists from the parliament soon?
Well, the protests, the counter-protests were expected. I mean, they were planned, and it was certainly something that any reasonable person would expect to happen. In terms of the numbers, also no great surprises there. The major difference between the coordination committee, the opponents of the Sadr, and the Sadrs themselves is that the Sadrs really do have grassroots support. It's really a very broad movement that attracts a lot of people amongst the poor segments of Iraq, and people really volunteer to participate in Sadr's demonstrations, whereas the coordination committee really have a lot of trouble bringing out the same numbers of people. And by that, I'm not trying to suggest that one movement or one side is better than the other. They're just very different in nature. So the size of the protest today was not particularly impressive, but that was expected also. In terms of whether or not it could escalate, yes, of course it could escalate. I mean, so far, the most likely outcome is that there'll be a negotiated solution to this. But still, at this stage, it's very early days. The images are obviously very dramatic, and we're going to have to wait to see how this plays out. But there's a lot of pressure on everyone to try to find common ground and to reach a settlement between them.
Is that grassroots populist support for Muqtada al-Sadr that you mentioned the main reason why security forces have allowed his supporters to remain inside the parliament building? Obviously, there is a need to avoid dangerous escalation and bloodshed, but does it also suggest there might be some sort of coordination going on between Sadr and other elements within the system?
Well, there's clearly coordination of some type that's happening, but I don't think it has anything to do with the fact that it's a grassroots movement. So the easy element of comparison that we can engage in to see whether or not there's coordination is when in 2019 there was a real grassroots movement of unaffiliated protesters who are not affiliated to political parties try to do the exact same thing that Muqtada Sadr has done twice over the past few days, which was to enter the parliament building. The security forces killed hundreds of protesters and wounded many thousands more. And now Muqtada Sadr can apparently send his protesters in, and they walk in and out of parliament at will without any reaction or any meaningful reaction from the security forces. So obviously there's tacit approval of some type. I mean, the reason has a lot to do with the fact that Muqtada Sadr runs an armed militia, and the state and many other actors are terrified of the possibility that this political disagreement could spill out into the streets in very violent form. And if the security forces decided to resist, then there would have been a very strong likelihood that the Sadrs might have come back with weapons. So there's that clear element, that clear characteristic or factor that contributed to this. And then the other factor is that the Iraqi state is not a cohesive state in the way that many people would like it to be. Its security sector and security forces are intermingled with militias like the Sadr's movement, amongst others. And the chief of staff and many other members of the security forces in Iraq have sympathies of some type or another with the Sadr's movement and don't want to engage in firefights with them.
Right.
And that's another reason why they allow it to happen in the way that it has.
Yeah, so important point that while you have protesters on many sides of the political divide, Sadr loyalists, he and others also control some very powerful militias. Would you say then the forces that would take their instructions from Sadr are the most powerful?
And that's another reason why they allow. I mean, there's certainly a very powerful political force. They have a very powerful military wing as well, and especially what they have, particularly in comparison with other groups in Iraq, is they have a very strong social base, which has deep religious roots that spans over many generations. And it's very, very distinct from groups that are in the coordination committee. which have very superficial support in Iraq. Firstly, they have not a very powerful historically significant military wing as well. They exist now politically, especially with particular political circumstances that exist today in Iraq, but they're very strong social base, and certainly nothing that has deep religious roots that span over many generations of Iraq, and it's very distinct. In the end, what's going to determine the outcomes that are in the coordination isn't going to be whether or not the have very superficial support in Iraq. They have not a very powerful historically significant military wing as well. They exist now politically, especially with their perceived comparisons today in Iraq, but they're very strong social base, and certainly nothing has deep religious roots. I've heard this actor say that they want to engage in wholesale reform of the political system with a view to engaging with something completely radical, but they will surely know, and the Sadr will surely know, that there's no support or extremely little support in Iraq's political class for the types of changes that they're looking for. So if they insist too much on that type of change, then they'll be isolated. So they won't insist too much. What they're very likely to do is to try to use the leverage that they have at the moment to negotiate a much better outcome for themselves than would have been possible just a few days ago. And currently, that looks like the most likely outcome, but nothing is excluded. I mean, there could be very large amounts of violence, but for now, it's not the most likely outcome.
Zaid Al Ali, thank you very much.
Thank you. What they're very likely to do
with the News Hour live from London, we'll still bring you on the programme. The UN chief calls for an end to nuclear weapons, warning total annihilation is only one misunderstanding away. NATO peacekeepers are called in as tensions flare at the Serbia-Kosovo border. And Europe has a new captain for next year's Ryder Cup. We'll have more on that with Gemma in sport. For the first time since the war in Ukraine began, a ship filled with corn has legally left port under a UN brokered deal struck with Russia. Millions of tons of grain has been stuck at Ukrainian ports for more than 5 months, and many hope Monday's shipment will help stop an escalating global food crisis. John Hendren was in Odessa as the ship left port.
This is a ship that could launch 1,000 others. The Razoni is the first cargo vessel to carry Ukrainian grain through the Black Sea since Russia invaded on February the 24th.
It was a great feeling. I felt as if we became free after being detained for a long time.
Trailing a pilot ship, the Razoni is a test run, bound for Istanbul, then Lebanon. If all goes well, many more will follow. Alexei Goncharenko, a member of the Ukrainian parliament, came to watch history in the making.
It's the liberation of the Black Sea from Putin and from Russian Empire. He tried and did everything he can not to give this ship and other ships possibility to leave Odessa port. And for almost half a year, it was like this. But as you see, he failed.
The ship departed despite several Russian attacks in the region and on the port of Odessa itself, since the UN brokered an agreement between Ukraine and Russia for the safe passage via Istanbul.
It's been a long time coming, but this is the ship everyone's been waiting for, coursing through wartime waters on its way to feed the world.
Ukraine says the shipments will create jobs and provide money to fuel the war effort. As the first of last year's delayed crop leaves, farmers risk their lives for this season's harvest, sometimes led by demining crews. Sometimes not. This harvester struck an explosive. The danger on the grain trail continues on the Black Sea journey to Turkey, through waters dotted with sea mines in an active war zone. It's all managed through a joint coordination center in Turkey, an extraordinary collaboration between representatives from the UN, Ukraine, and Russia.
We believe that it's critical to ensuring global food security, so yes, we need to succeed.
Whether this is the beginning of the effort to avert a global food crisis or the end depends in part on the voyage of the Razoni. John Hendren, Al Jazeera, Odessa, Ukraine.
For more now on the ship's journey, Al Jazeera's Sinem Koscioglu has more from Istanbul.
we believe that it's
we are expecting that this journey is going to be around 220, 230 sea miles. So the first ship left Odessa port. We are expecting some more ships leaving their ports and joining with the Razone vessel somewhere in the Black Sea. And like a small...
The head of Iran's atomic agency says his country has the ability to produce a nuclear bomb, but doesn't plan to. Mohammad Eslami made the remarks just hours before the US announced fresh sanctions on entities involved in Iran's oil and petrochemical trade. Ali Hashim has more.
It was a rare announcement from Iran's atomic agency chief Mohammad Eslami. Comments which echo those made recently by another senior government figure.
It is no secret that we have become a nuclear threshold state, and this is a reality. It is also no secret that we have the technical capabilities required to manufacture a nuclear bomb.
It would be an advancement of Iran's nuclear program far beyond the limits outlined in a 2015 deal with the West.
I am announcing today
agency deal abandoned by former U.S. President which echo those made recently by another United Nations conference on non-proliferation.
It is no secret that we have become a nuclear threshold state, and this is a reality. It is also no secret that we have the technical capabilities required to manufacture a nuclear bomb.
It would be an advancement of Iran's nuclear program far beyond the limits outlined in the 2015 It was the last announcement
I am announcing today
Agency Chief Mohammed Islam by former U.S. President, which echo those made recently by another United Nations conference on proliferation.
It is no secret that we have become a nuclear threshold state. This is a reality. It is also no secret that we have the technical capabilities required to manufacture a nuclear bomb.
Putting a new proposal advancement of Iran's nuclear program.
After reviewing the draft text, it is possible that we can reach a conclusion regarding the timetable for the negotiations. We'll probably see a new round of negotiations.
It is no secret that we have become a nuclear threshold state. This is a reality. It is also no secret that we have the technical capabilities required to manufacture a nuclear bomb.
Putting a new proposal advancement and assurance that the next administration will be
After reviewing the draft text, it is possible that we can reach a conclusion regarding the timetable for the negotiations. We'll probably see a new round of negotiations.
And it wants confirmation
It is no secret that we have become a nuclear threshold state. This is a reality. It is also no secret that we have the technical capabilities
several media outlets in Taiwan are reporting that U.S. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi will visit the territory. She said Pelosi had seen that the media is currently for Asia and historically been critical of China's authorities. Beijing has repeated against Now, several media outlets in Taiwan are reporting that U.S. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi will visit the territory. She said Pelosi had seen that the media is currently for Asia and historically been critical of China's authorities. Beijing has repeated
Very serious
Now, several media outlets in Taiwan are reporting that U.S. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi will visit the territory. She said Pelosi had seen that the media is currently for Asia and historically been critical of China's authorities. Beijing has repeated
very serious
For 3 days, at least 2,000 people have abandoned their homes.
We don't want to be there to when they do say get out, have 15 minutes to get out, and then we got all ourselves packed up, ready to go, so we get out of there as soon as possible.
The UN Secretary-General has apologized after UN peacekeepers opened fire at a border post in the eastern part of the Democratic Republic of Congo on Sunday, killing 2 people. The violence came just days after 3 peacekeepers and 15 protesters were killed during anti-UN demonstrations in North Kivu province. Antonio Guterres says the organization is totally committed to peace. Catherine Soy reports.
UN peacekeepers are mourning soldiers in Beni, North Kivu province. Some were killed during last week's protests in the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo. The demonstrations against the UN mission MONUSCO started in Goma, the provincial capital, and spread rapidly. It's still tense in the region. Some Congolese are calling for the force of about 16,000 troops to leave.
We sit in contemplation not only of their painful absence among us, but also of the way that they strengthen our efforts in service of bringing peace in the Democratic Republic of Congo. And each time we gather under circumstances such as these, we recognize
For 3 days, at least 2,000 people have abandoned their homes.
We will not stop protesting against MONUSCO.
When they do say get out, have 15 minutes to get out,
to
and
leave.
we
We
got all
have
ourselves
lost our
packed up,
family
ready to go, so we
members,
get out of there
so we have
as
to
soon as
continue the
possible.
fight and keep their memories
The
alive.
UN Secretary-General has apologized
Eastern
after
DRC
UN
is
peacekeepers
rich
opened
in
fire at a
minerals,
border
but it's
post in
also
the eastern part of the
volatile.
Democratic Republic
More
of
than
Congo on
100
Sunday,
armed
killing
groups
2
operate
people.
in the region.
The violence
They have
came just
plundered
days after 3
villages, killed
peacekeepers and
civilians,
15
and
protesters
forced
were
more
killed
than
during anti-UN
300,000
demonstrations
people to
in
leave their homes.
North Kivu province.
Many Congolese
Antonio Guterres
say
says the
they want to
organization
feel
is
safe,
totally committed
and
to
the
peace.
peacekeepers are
Catherine
unable to
Soy
protect
reports.
them. Catherine Soy, Al Jazeera.
A
UN
military
peacekeepers
helicopter
are
with
mourning
6 people on
soldiers
board
in
has gone
Beni,
missing in
North
Pakistan.
Kivu province.
Air traffic control lost contact
Some
with the
were
aircraft
killed
in
during
Las Bela
last
in the
week's
country's
protests
south.
in the
It was
Eastern
helping with
Democratic
a flood
Republic
relief
of Congo.
operation in Baluchistan province. An
The
army general and
demonstrations
5
against
others
the
were on
UN
that
mission
flight.
MONUSCO
The military has not
started
said
in
how
Goma,
long the
the
helicopter has
provincial
been
capital,
missing.
and
Southern
spread
Pakistan has been
rapidly.
dealing with unusually heavy monsoon
It's still
rains.
tense in the region. Some Congolese are
Siraj Foy on
calling
the
for the
programme.
force of about
We'll bring you news from
16,000
Senegal.
troops
The
to
ruling
leave.
party claims victory in parliamentary elections, but the turnout was 22%. Desperate for fuel, huge crowds flock towards a damaged tanker in Libya just moments before it explodes.
And each time we gather under circumstances, we
And it's days, at least 2,000 people have abandoned their homes.
Rise up, heading its way further north by the mid of the week. We'll see some pretty impressive temperatures across western areas of Europe. Now on Tuesday, we've still got those high temperature warnings out across the
Eastern
Iberian
DRC
Peninsula,
is rich
Spain
in
and
minerals,
Portugal. A few
but it's
showers
also
popping up
volatile.
here and there across
More
Spain.
than
Further north of
100
France, clear
operate
skies
in the
as you
region.
can
They
see.
have
And we are going to
plundered
clear
villages,
skies across
killed
central areas of Europe.
forced
The
more
showers
than
start to shift their way
300,000
further east.
people
Much
to
of
leave their
the wetter
homes.
weather can be found
Many
across
Congolese
western areas of
says the
Russia
organisation
and
is totally
Ukraine.
committed
We
to
have a look
peace.
on Wednesday. You
Are
can see that
unable
clears
to
up
protect
nicely.
them.
Temperatures
Catherine
certainly
Soy,
on the
Al
up
Jazeera.
here. The wetter weather, we have to
UN
head up to
peacekeepers are
Scandinavia.
mourning
It's been
soldiers
wet,
in
windy
Beni,
weather sweeping
North
its way
Kivu
past Norway
province.
and Sweden. And there's more on the way of
Some were
showers
killed
for
during
Britain
last
and
week's
Ireland. But there is still a lot of
in the Eastern
warm and
Democratic
muggy
Republic
weather
of Congo.
Baluchistan
south of this,
An
clear
army
skies
general
across
and
much
5
of
others were on
Italy
that
towards the
flight.
southeast.
The military
Temperatures
has not said
in
how
Turkey,
long
where
the
we
helicopter
expect
has
them to
been
be
missing.
for this time
Southern
of year. They
Pakistan
have
has
come
been dealing
down
with
slightly.
unusually
But it's
heavy
really going to be
monsoon
western
rain.
areas
in the
that see
region.
temperatures
Some
pick up
Congolese
rather
are
dramatically.
calling
If
for
we
the
look at
force
the
of
3
about
days,
16,000
Senegal,
troops
the
to
ruling
leave.
party claims
will be 10
victory in
degrees above
parliamentary
the average,
elections, but
but by
turnout
Wednesday
was 22%. Desperate for fuel, huge crowds flock towards a damaged tanker in Libya just moments before it explodes.
The Sheikh Hamad Award for Translation
And it's at least 2,000 people have abandoned their homes.
Eastern DRC is rich in also orange
here and there across
more than 100
areas that have likely
killed and treated protesters were killed during anti-UN demonstrations in their home. Many combatant areas of the organization is so committed to peace.
The temperatures certainly on the up here. The wetter weather we have to head up to Scandinavia. Welcome back. Look at the main stories now. Thousands of protesters backing Iraqi Shia politician Muqtada al-Sadr are camped inside the country's parliament building still. They are refusing to leave until there is political change or some sort of concessions made to Sadr. On Monday, supporters of rival groups moved in to stake their own position. US House Speaker Nancy Pelosi is on a tour of Asia where she's visited Singapore. Several media outlets in Taiwan are reporting she also plans to visit the territory, and that's been drawing warnings from China. Nigeria is saying it's destroyed more than 1,500 illegal crude refining sites in a renewed campaign to clamp down on oil theft. It's lost more than $3 billion in 1 year, with more losses projected this year. Al Jazeera's Ahmed Idris joined security forces as they hunted down the oil thieves in the Niger Delta.
In the air, on land, and at sea, the Nigerian military is under strict orders to end the plundering of the country's oil. When security forces returned to the site they destroyed 5 weeks earlier, they encountered oil thieves. As troops chased them, the vandals ran towards their boats, hidden in the creeks. One is captured.
In terms of crushing these illegal refining sites, we have crushed thousands of them. As you are destroying one site, before you get to the other one, another one is springing up again.
This pipeline is one of the most frequently vandalized in the country.
/EN.
It delivers 500,000 barrels of oil a day to an export terminal. But for the past 5 months, not a drop was delivered, as the operator, Shell, was forced to shut it down.
We've had situations where when we go into cooking camps, IRS camps like this, they've set fire to the camps, endangering us and our equipment.
Most of the stolen crude is ferried to larger vessels at sea by barges like these, which are usually hard to apprehend. Flying over the creeks, the devastation caused by oil bunkering is massive. Hidden under tree canopies, the oil thieves are putting finishing touches to this facility, capable of refining tens of thousands of gallons a day. And instead of using firewood, they now steal gas to distill the crude.
Military commanders say there are hundreds of these illegal distilleries scattered across the oil-producing delta. In addition to bleeding the economy dry, the operations also damage the environment because they are not properly equipped to process crude oil.
The plunder of Nigeria's oil has left the country unable to meet its OPEC quota.
Activities are going on as I speak to you now. So much collaboration going on with the communities to make sure that they are also involved in the process of protecting these assets.
The company looks up to the renewed clampdown to return to profitability. But with all thieves continuing